from time to time, Tom Bradbury comes up to me and he tells me his definition of a good sermon. He says it's a sermon that has a message and where Dick gets toasted. Well, Tom isn't here today, but if he were, he would be sitting on the edge of his seat waiting for a sermon that has a message and where Ruth gets toasted. After all, the title of the sermon is Payback Time. Did that sound like a nefarious laugh? Well, like today, a few years ago in Pepperell, Ruth asked me to do a sermon one Sunday when she was going to be away. The lectionary reading for that day was the story of Mary and Martha. So, like today, I didn't show her my sermon ahead of time. On that Friday morning, as she left and when I got up, I found a note on the breakfast table reminding me to mow the lawn and also not to forget the church lawn. So while I was mowing, I found myself getting madder and madder. It was a hot day. And in fact, I composed a sermon in my head while I was mowing. I decided that Martha had gotten a bad rap, and without her, Mary would not have had the leisure to play the role of the saintly one. Now you can guess who I felt were the Martha and Mary in our family. So to have a little fun, I decided to illustrate my sermon points through a parody. In the role of Martha, I proceeded to list all the work that I did to help run the church, while Mary did almost nothing. All Mary did was provide this little speech every Sunday morning. Well, unfortunately, I have to say the parody was too convincing, and some listened in a state of shock. They didn't know it was a parody. So, unaware of all of this, when she returned, she was told by several of the parishioners that she didn't do anything, and that it was Dick who did all the work around the church. Well, I was deep in the doghouse for about 2 weeks until she finally started laughing. So, let us pray. May the meditations of my heart and the words of my mouth keep me out of trouble. What did you say? You betcha? What's that?
I said, just preach.
Just preach. Well, so this is supposed to be a sermon about my faith journey, so now I will proceed in this direction. I was born into a theologically divided family, baptized by my first-generation mother, who was a German Lutheran, and attended by my father was of English heritage, and he was a Baptist who reluctantly attended my mother's church. But then he decided that he needed something different. So they settled the issue by using the method of Solomon. They split the difference and we became Methodists. I actually liked the Methodist church better because it had more interesting Sunday school teachers, including a Marine who had fought at Guadalcanal, and he used to regale us with stories of his experiences. And don't forget, that wasn't that long after the war. As a child, I loved to find out about things, the sheer wonder of the stars and planets, earthly phenomena. They served actually to deepen my faith in God. Science became for me another way to know God. And so whenever I discovered a new thing, I would think, wow, so that's how he did it. I wish I thought of that. In high school, I talked a lot to God, sometimes even getting mad at him. During long prayers, and I always said long prayers every night, I sometimes just fell asleep. It's a great way to fall asleep if you've got insomnia. Just say long prayers. However, despite the sense of a personal connection with God, I did not take to the institutional practices of religion, centered on its formulaic creedal statements. To me, there was like a wedge between me and God with those. They demanded responses that seemed to interfere with what I felt was the more natural way of relating to God. I wasn't up for somebody else telling me how to think. Well, I'll say more about that later. But now let's get to the interesting part of this sermon. Girls. Although I like my school, my choice of an all-boys college was a poor strategy for meeting girls. So for my master's program, I attended a Catholic co-ed university where things began to look up. It seemed to me that Catholic girls were always the best looking. So there were three things that were important to me when I looked for a girl. Beauty, or at least comeliness, intelligence, and a deep but quiet faith. So I developed a plan. I decided to date a nun. You think I'm kidding? She was a lovely lass of Irish descent with beautiful eyes. Actually, she wasn't officially a nun since she'd left the convent, St. Mary's of Notre Dame, after only a year as a novitiate. But the fact that she was drawn to express her faith in this way impressed me greatly. And after Marquette, we both went to Purdue for further graduate study, where after a few years we were engaged and then later just followed our own paths. I completed my PhD and moved to Cambridge, Mass. And then this began a period of intense focus on career development, or at least keeping my job, with little time on Sundays for church. After several years, I met the woman who became Lillian's mom. She was pretty, intelligent, like Lillian, and spiritual, although not in a church-going way. My focus continued on career development, or at least on not getting fired. And from time to time, I would look for a church, but I felt like a hypocrite because I couldn't completely buy into the church doctrines. It was like being on the outside of a window looking through, and they were having a party on the inside, but I didn't belong. I shouldn't go through that door is how I felt. So after 11 years, our marriage came to an end, and Lillian was less than 2 at the time, and I didn't know if I'd be able to have really to be with her as she grew up, to have a relationship with her. At that time, I knew that I had finally reached bottom. I mean, how low can you get? And was not in charge of my life. So in despair, I conceded defeat in my struggle to manage on my own and began to look for a church. I was going to belong. So the congregational church that I had attended from time to time during this period was closed for the summer, so I tried the local Methodist church. Since the choir was off for the summer, the anthem was sung by a soloist who had a somewhat mediocre voice. Now, I concluded that she had to know that she wasn't that good, and yet she was willing to offer what meager gift she had to God. And I thought, wow, that's a church for me. So I ended up joining. And Burl's not here, but I'm going to give her the strategy for attracting new members. Now, I vowed never to miss church again if that were all possible. In a way, I felt like a recovering church avoider. Since I had children on weekends, they had no choice but to be with me, stationed, and so they came. They had a tent, And every Sunday, stationed at the back of the church were several ladies waiting for me to hand off Lillian for the final touches. They'd sweep her into the ladies' room and straighten her hair out and straighten her dress. And one time I had her dress on backwards, and they they straighten it out, and then they hand her back to me. And then we go upstairs and we attend church. It was there that I met Ruth after some period of time. And 5 years later, we were married. God was attentive to my needs. It was my payback time, a dividend that I did not expect. Now, getting back to Tom's definition of a good sermon. Don't be nervous. I actually enjoy being Henny Youngman's wife. Now, that's an inside joke for old people if you don't get it. But being a Martha for a saintly Mary is actually a great job. I recently read a book by Harvey Cox that's entitled The Future of Faith, which gives an historical perspective on the evolution of Christian faith, and it kind of helped me in my thinking as well. He argues that the Christian era can be divided into three periods, with the first 3 centuries, first centuries up through the third being what he calls the age of faith in Jesus, where the focus was on following the way of Jesus. The next 15 centuries he calls the age of belief, which is characterized by beliefs about Jesus. And then the current period he sees as a spiritual age, with a new kind of church emerging, especially in non-Western countries, what he calls the southern countries, and actually as well as some of the larger American churches, for example, Saddleback. You wonder how it's the same as some of the southern churches, and that's for another time. But I find that my heart lies in the first of these 3 periods. It's there that I'm most able to experience the historical Jesus and to hear his voice most clearly. So when Lillian, I have a trouble of mixing up my names. One time I called Julie Jesus. When Lillian began her PhD studies at Harvard six years ago, I thought, well, why not join her, involve myself there in a few courses as well. So since then, I've taken about 20 courses in Christian and Jewish studies at the Divinity School as part of my own spiritual request. I seek to obtain a better understanding of what I feel is a vibrant pre-canon, pre-doctrinal time when the faith of Jesus was explosive and fluid, with many competing ideas about who he was, even between and within the communities. And even these communities that were centered about the various disciples who knew him. So that really helps me find myself. And I expect to continue my studies as long as I am able. This is who I am. It's a vital part of my spiritual quest. So happy are those who delight in the law of the Lord, and on his law they meditate day and night. They are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield its fruit in its season, and their leaves do not wither. I am a happy man.